Flav or Flave, still don't know, says, by the way, Flav, you entertained me for one full night on Twitter Spaces. I had absolutely nothing to do. Shout out to you for entertaining me in some pretty thrilling conversation on Mr. Roscoe's Spaces. Shout out to him as well. Thank you, Flav. But he says, reminds me of the people that say, quote unquote, they can't win a Super Bowl with Purdy. ... Not the or not the 3 dots, just ... Least bold take you can have. If Purdy ends up being Dan Marino, this fan base would be like, quote unquote, see, I told you he couldn't do it. But he doesn't end the quote. Sorry, Flav, I had to pick at your grammar a little bit there. But not to be a jerk, what do you guys think of this? Do you guys think that, hey, there's this segment that's just saying, well, if he doesn't win a Super Bowl, then anything he does is good enough? Because I haven't seen conversation like that. I think there's a lot more nuance to that conversation. But I'm going to start off with Larry because I can see Larry's already ready to go.
I mean, the level of stupidity of this is just off the charts. I mean, think about this. There's one team's going to win the Super Bowl. Okay, so you got to probably what's the Niners' chances of winning the Super Bowl in Vegas? Like 11%. So you got an 89%. If you're saying that the Niners can't win the Super Bowl, you got a fucking 89% chance of being right. So at the end of the day, what are we talking about? So if you say they can't win a Super Bowl this year with Brock Purdy, you got an 89% chance of being right. Really, so he's right. It is the least bold take you can have. That, in a way, it's almost lazy too. It's like, well, I mean, there's a lot of reasons teams win and reasons teams lose. What if Brock Purdy plays awesome, but the Niners lose 5 key defenders and are giving up 38 points a game? So, I mean, there's context that has to be taken into consideration. It's not as simple. In basketball, it could be as simple as, you didn't have Steph Curry. There's 5 guys on the floor. There's 53 guys on the roster. So, you know what? If you're saying, I don't think he can win the Super Bowl, you got an 89% chance of being right. So, I mean, it's not, if you take anything else and you said, and you had an 89% chance of winning and you made it a statement, people would be like, yeah, so what? I mean, it's a big, what kind of a statement's that? You're bound to be right. And if you're wrong, it's like you should almost get your whatever you're speaking on should be stripped away from you. If you side with the 89% over the 11% and the 11% beats your ass, you should be basically eliminated for communicating in whatever form you communicated in. Because you took the lowest percentage chance and you're like, we made this the barometer that is the end all be all. So I don't have a lot of respect for the crowd of like, well, he's probably not going to win the Super Bowl. They made it to the NFC Championship with a rookie quarterback last year. So, are they going to win the Super Bowl this year? Well, odds are they're not. So is it going to be Brock Purdy's fault? I mean, come on, seriously. Seriously. Jesse. And while we're doing this, we're like then going, well, he lost to the Bears, but it was a monsoon. Now it's like we're creating excuses for convenient narrative. And it's like, come on, it's a team sport. We'll see how it goes. Let's just say that's all I'll say to that.
Jesse.
Yeah. I think you can look at this both ways. The way that I see it is I think that Brock Purdy with this roster can win a Super Bowl. But for me, like the questions of what Brock Purdy is or is not going to be aren't necessarily going to be answered with this roster as currently constructed. We're going to have to look into the future. Does he get paid? And if he gets paid and you start stripping pieces away, it's going to take a while before we're fully going to know, in my opinion. But to think he can't win a Super Bowl with this roster and the way he played last year, I think would be pretty damn bold to say it's impossible. Yeah, it may not be likely, but it is definitely possible. But what I would say is, regardless of the chances, the 49ers moved on from Jimmy Garoppolo and drafted Trey Lance because they felt like they couldn't win the Super Bowl with Jimmy Garoppolo, regardless of the reason, whether it was injury, what have you. So the guy that you're going with this year, the reason they can't just turn it over to Trey Lance, and they were willing to do so last year, is they were willing to go through the growing pains because they felt like at the end of the season, Trey Lance week 18 would be different than Trey Lance week 1, and maybe they could win with that, and that would be enough. This year, they're unwilling to go through those growing pains because they don't have the time to do so. So the expectation, regardless of the percentage, is that they do win a Super Bowl. And that, fair or not, is the expectation, regardless of who the quarterback is. And they are choosing to not go with Trey Lance if Brock Purdy is healthy because they expect to win the Super Bowl.
Right. Well said, both of you. I will say this also. If Purdy ends up being Dan Marino and the 49ers with this roster, this coach, everything, somehow don't win the Super Bowl there too, start firing everybody, man. There is something like that doesn't make sense in my head of like, if he ends up being Dan Marino and we're still saying that all like there's a scenario that, that doesn't fire
here's
everybody.
One other thing has to be added. To me, I mean, and people, nobody's ever hitting on this, but it's obvious. If the 49ers knew, why did they go with Trey? What's changed in 1 year? Brock Purdy. That's what's changed in 1 year. Last year, they wouldn't have gone forward with Trey and given him that opportunity if they knew that Purdy was going to play the way he played. They didn't know that what they had in Brock Purdy. They can say that they liked him in the draft, and God knows you got to credit them. They're the ones who drafted him. But if they knew that they had a super polished quarterback, they wouldn't have even been all in on Trey Lance last year. The difference between last year and this year is now they have Brock Purdy. Now they know they have a guy that they could lean on that can potentially win. So if Brock Purdy didn't exist, they'd be giving Trey another chance again this year because he would, in their mind, he's the best they got. Now they're looking at Brock going, you know what? Maybe he ain't the best we got. We actually played pretty well with this other guy. I think that's the real difference.
I completely disagree with that. I'm going to touch on Green Glassful, who decided to give $2 this time, not to take a shot at Jesse, but to take a shot at Grant. So he says Grant's videos are pathetic. Thank you, Green Glassful. Had to read it. Not the kindest thing to say. We promote kindness here, but okay, fine. You got your double shot off. Now, I completely disagree with that they would have opened it up for Trey Lance. If that scenario that you described happened and the season tanked with Jimmy Garoppolo getting hurt, right, I think we would be seeing the same exact quarterback competition that we are seeing right now, except both those guys would be competing for the starting job. He is in a competition with Sam Darnold, right? And he is in a competition with Sam Darnold despite Brock Purdy being hurt. They gave him the job the year before. Now he's in a competition with the guy who started 55 games and washed up on two different teams. Those two things don't add up if something hasn't changed for the guy. And they also brought back one Jimmy Garoppolo as the little shadow that hangs over Trey Lance's head. And the question I always ask, and it's a massive hypothetical, we can never know the answer and we get there. But if they started 3-4 with that embarrassing Sunday night loss against Denver on national TV, at Denver against Nate Hackett and Russell Wilson, and that embarrassing loss the subsequent week at Atlanta against Marcus Mariota, do you think Trey Lance, after all the palpable tension that existed after they lost week 1 to Chicago, do you think he makes it to week 8 and week 9? Garoppolo was brought back to save their season in that exact scenario. They brought back the guy that they told everybody and their grandmother for 3 straight years, we do not want this guy playing quarterback for us. We'll get anybody else. We want to get rid of this guy. They couldn't get anybody to take this guy. Remember, Shanahan was telling coaches at the owners meeting 2 years ago, that's what they were saying, that, hey, why aren't you guys trading for Jimmy? He's better than the quarterback you have. Do you guys remember that? I remember that. They wanted to get rid of Garoppolo at every capacity. They brought him back. This idea that everything's the same with Trey Lance. Everything's good and dandy. It's just Purdy just showed up and he's so special. That's half the story. Sam Darnold's here for a reason. He's here to compete for this job for a reason. And it's because as much as I think they still like the outlook of Trey Lance, I think they are less optimistic of the process of him reaching that outlook within this roster than they were a year. Now, that's still a massive change, or it's not as much a negative change on Trey Lance as often this is portrayed when we talk about it, but it's still enough of a change because, hey, Mr. 55 games started somewhere else and didn't get it done when he was given the starting job and the keys of the franchise. Remember, the Panthers gave Sam Darnold $18 million fully guaranteed. They guaranteed that to him before he suited up a game for Carolina. So they committed to him that way. And he's now here. Come on. I can't buy the, hey, everything's happy with Trey Lance now.
Well, then wait a second. Where did he disappoint them? I mean, did he disappoint them in a meeting? Did he disappoint them in the Chicago game? Did he disappoint them in the first drive of the Seattle game? I mean, exactly where did they decide to get off of the Trey Lance bandwagon? I personally think that Sam Darnold is fool's gold. I don't think Sam Darnold can beat out Trey Lance. I maybe I'll be wrong, but if you're asking me my professional opinion, I don't think Sam Darnold can beat out Trey Lance. I don't. So I don't know what I'm a little uneasy with the whole conversation because I don't really know what Sam Darnold and Brandon Allen are even doing here. To me, it's Brock's your 1, Trey's your 2, and the rest of this stuff just seems like it's hedge. But I don't get it because hedging off of what? You didn't like Trey's this or that. I feel like there doesn't it seem like, guys, there's a huge dramatic backstory that we're not privy to here, because otherwise, if it's just based on play, I'm not getting the presence of Darnold and Allen, other than you wound up with Josh Johnson and in the biggest game of the year, and God knows, you walked out of that stadium going, this can't happen again, and maybe that's why Darnold's here, maybe that's why Allen's here, but I other than that, I really don't get it. Darnold's been pretty bad. Allen's been worse. And I'm not exactly sure. I don't know why they went after those guys other than insurance policies, but I don't necessarily see what they see in either guy either.